Okay, everyone, we're going to get started now. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. On behalf of the Meal TLL, we've been wanting to put this webinar together to help not only our meal staff, but also the staff that we work with on a day-to-day basis, like human resources and finance. So welcome to the hiring meal staff and budgeting for meal activities. Um, we have a couple of just really quick notes. So please introduce yourself in the chat. You can write your name, the office that you're coming from, and then also your job title. And then if you need a Spanish or French translation, we do have it available to us today. If you click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to click on either the Spanish or French translation. And if it's not showing on your screen, you might need to click on the three dots for more menu options, and then you can click on that. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, please go ahead and put that into the Q&A section, or you can put it in the chat, and we'll note that down. We do have a question and answer section at the very end after our two presentations, and so we'll have our presenters answer them there. This webinar is being recorded. So we are recording it in English. However, we are going to try to record it in Spanish and French, and we will be sending those out later on. Just a quick agenda. Once we do this, then we'll have our two presentations. We'll have a Q&A at the end, and then we'll have a few closing remarks. And now I would like to introduce our presenters. We have Jose Orozco from AD UK. He's been with AD UK for 4 years, and he's a programs officer there. We also have Liliana Waldendorf. She's been with ADRA Germany for 6 years. She is the Meal TLL co-chair and also the Meal Unit team leader and deputy director for international cooperation. So without any further ado, I will pass it on to Jose to get started.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everybody. Good morning, afternoon. Depends where you are. I see some people from Fiji, so good evening for you all. So just 1 second, and I'll start sharing my screen. See if I can find it. There it is. Okay, so like Carrie said, this is going to be a webinar a little bit different from the ones that we usually do in the Meal TLL. We wanted to reach out to the finance and HR people and to bring everybody together because meal is something that we have to do together. Just the first thing that we want to do here is look at the session objectives. So we have 3 objectives for this part of the session. So there will be 2 sessions. Liliana will lead the other one. In this part, we want to understand meal's purpose within our work. We want to see, where it is that we use meal and why does it matter. The second thing we want to learn is how to develop a budget for meal. We want to give you some guidelines on where certain things can be identified that are specifically for meal and how does that fit within the rest of your budget. And finally, we want to identify which items to include in a meal, project, and program budget. So there are a lot of things sometimes that, in my experience, we tend to put in some areas when they should be in other areas. Sometimes it is good to have an idea on where things go. So yes, before we start, I just want to give you this first graphic. I know it's a little bit small, but
Jose, really quickly, sorry, can you
yes.
switch the screen that you're sharing? I think you're sharing the presenter view right now.
Okay, let me see. Is that the one? No? Okay, perfect. So yes, I think it's a little bit small, but in general, what we have here is what we call the project cycle. As you can see in the project cycle, we have 5 areas. Now, your offices might call it differently. Your experience might be different with this, but in general, this is what it looks like. We have needs assessments, we have project design, development, project design, implementing and monitoring, and evaluation and learning. So this is the monitoring, evaluation, and accountability learning in the project cycle. So this is where we work. As you can see, we're everywhere. In every single part of the project, we are involved. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but in the needs assessment, you need to have your context and capacity analysis, your portfolio design. You need to have a meal plan drafted. That's your standard meal plan. You need to identify your meal staff and the project needs. In implementation, you need to think about the startup workshop. In our startup workshops, for example, we always have meal. That's one of the sections that we have during our workshops. And evaluation and learning, we have to collect the lessons learned and how that feeds into our projects and also into our organization. And, you know, all these things cost money. Everything on this list costs money. So we need to make sure that we have the money to do all these things. Now, some projects and some programs might not need to do all these things, but you will need some of them. So you need to make sure that you have the money to do them, because meal isn't the whole project cycle. Now, what is a costed meal budget? A costed meal budget describes and budgets for all meal activities that are necessary to implement a meal system over a defined period. So, like I was saying, there are a lot of things in meal that we want to do, and we will get to this later. But we all know there's finite resources. So we have to be very strategic about what's necessary and what we need in order to have a good meal system in our projects and our offices. Some activities will be project-centric, but others will go beyond a project cycle. So a lot of times what happens is we only account for the activities that are project-centric. So the donor requirements, right? So you have to make sure you look at, oh, the donor wants this, the donor wants that, but we need to start thinking a little bit beyond that. Do we need to do some assessments, some lessons learned from a couple of projects? After the project is done, do we want to go back to this area and see how things are 6 months, 3 months, a year later? Do we have money for that? So I think it's very important for us to have that thinking that we need to go beyond just the project. What resources do we have available to do this? And I think Liliana will go into that later. It's staffing, right? So sometimes we just hire a meal person just for the project, but we don't have a meal person full time. How does that impact what we're trying to do as an office? So how do we do this? How do we prepare the budget? We need to itemize meal budget needs. So the more detailed, the better. Just go one by one. I think as a meal person, we like to do our objectives and our activities and our block frames with all the details. So this is no different. You need to make sure that we know exactly what we need. So we have to be very specific. Then we need to incorporate those needs, this cost into the project budget. So where do we put it? Sometimes we tend to put some things. We put some things in different lines. We try to hide costs, move things around, but it usually is better to have the meal costs very clear so that we know what we're doing and how we're doing it. And like I mentioned before, we need to review any donor requirements and contributions. So some donors will give you specifically an amount for meal. Other donors will have external meal people, and then take that away from your budgets. So you have to be really careful and read the finer print sometimes on your donor requirements regarding meal. Some will have, minimum or maximum requirements of the budget, how much budget you can give to meal. So very important to make sure that we know this. And you need to include both one-off and periodic activities that require meal systems. So, for example, there are baseline, that's a one-off. You only do one baseline per project. Hopefully it goes well, so you don't have to do it twice. But there's things like post PDM, so like post distribution monitoring that you have to do every time you do a distribution. So we need to make sure that we clearly define how many times we do something, if it's one-off or it's multiple times. We do this with other items. So I think we do that with trainings, you have 3 trainings, we do that with travel costs, things like that. So it's just very important that we differentiate these costs, especially when you're planning ahead in your project. And something that we should do more often, and we rarely do, is we need to plan for contingencies. Sometimes we plan to do some monitoring in some remote areas, but then the rains come, so the transportation costs will be higher. If there's droughts, people will not be as available. We need to have a contingency. Some projects have it as a block, so you could do it for meal. It's up to you really how you do it, but it's always good to have a little buffer just in case something happens outside of your control. Yeah, this one is a question for everybody. So just want to get your thoughts on this one. So if you put in the chat, what do you think is the right answer? Which of the following is not it's not to be itemized in the meal budget? So we have A, human resources, you have B, Olympic tickets, you have C, capital expenses, and you have D, contingency costs. So in my opinion, these are all very important, but I want to hear from you guys. Which one shouldn't be itemized? Which one of these should not be included? So let's see if you get some answers in the chat. Anybody? Which one do you think? B? Okay. Okay, I really wanted to go to the Olympics, but I guess not this year. We won't cost that amount then. All right, fair enough. Yeah, so clearly enough, we need to Olympic tickets wouldn't be something you itemize, something you want to include in your meal budget. But joking aside, there are things that sometimes you should leave out of the meal budget. For example, some things I have seen, I'm trying to think of the top of my head, is printing costs. So if you want to have printing costs, yes, sometimes there are a meal expense, but not just the whole project's meal costs are the projects. Should be a meal expense. So that's why you say printing for questionnaires. That's why you itemize rather than saying printing costs, because then some of the money that should be going for meal will be you won't be able to use because you're using it for something else. So let's go into these. So we have itemizing the meal budget, human resources. So what goes into human resources? Staffing, external consultants, capacity building, training, related expenses, so translation, data entry for baseline, end-life service, etc. So a lot of people tend to put the staffing within the staff costs, and some donors do require that. So sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. But if you can separate it, and it gives you a clear understanding of where your staffing is and how much you're spending on meal, even if it's percentages, because I know some offices will do 50% of a person's time on a project, so on, but it needs to be clear. Something that's very important, capacity building. We have the meal trainings, the meal TLL organizes these. If you're sending your staff to these trainings, you can technically sometimes put a percentage of those costs within some of the projects. So yeah, and everything from translations, we know translations are not cheap, but we need to account for them if we need to. A lot of the countries we work in, we have some places that are remote that is really You have multiple languages within 10 kilometers. So you need to be very careful on how you reach these communities and make sure that you're speaking their language so they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And data entry, yeah, it's also one that's it's tricky. You need to make sure you have enough for data clerks, for data cleaning, data processing, and data storage. Most of us, I speak for my office, we don't have the capacity to do this ourselves. So we need to make sure that we put that clearly there. So human resources is very important that we make sure that we know what we need to do for meal in this regard. Capital expenses. This is meals a favorite thing. So facility costs, we offices, office equipment, like I mentioned, supplies, the printing, travel and lodging. If you're doing monitoring on the field, this is a lot. This is a lot of resources that you need to go to the field, fuel costs, things like that, computer hardware, software. Software is very important for meal. Are you using Vivo? Are you using SPSS? What programs are you using? Do you just use Excel? Then that's good. You save yourself some money, but depends on the amount of data that you're processing that you require certain things. And something very important is disseminating meal documents. So we need to, how will we process? A lot of people have gone digital, but if you're still printing them, and even sometimes the digital stuff costs money because you got to put it on a website and you got to share certain things. So make sure that you account for all these things properly. And like I mentioned, contingency costs, unplanned expenses such as inflation, currency devaluation, equipment theft, or the need for additional data collection and analysis. Speaking about equipment theft, sometimes, well, all projects should have their own insurance. But even, insurance companies still take forever. They might take a while to refund you. So where are you going to have the resources to cover the equipment while the insurance refunds you? And if they do, so it's very important to do this and make sure you cover yourself and you protect yourself from unforeseen circumstances. Now let's look at how that looks. Just see this here. As you can see, we have 3 activities. I mentioned earlier duration, and then you have costs, right? So let's go with this activity. Let's train farmers. It takes 2 weeks, and you have very clearly here, we're going to train 50 farmers for 10 days. So each day it costs $15 per person to train. So then you do the maths. The good thing about finance people and meal people is that we both like maths. So you should be speaking the same language, right? You should be talking in numbers here. So of course, the meal person will want more money, but finance people, I agree with you. Sometimes you have to be very stringent, right? So as you can see here, the delivery of tools, it takes 1 week. Again, very specific. 1 truck, 550 kilometers. How much per kilometer? Some offices, my office has a very standardized cost per kilometers. Maybe you have a very trusted provider that has established costs. All those things have to be included so you know exactly what's happening. And just to add to this, for example, what would be a good contingency? So let me see. Yeah, let's do delivery of tools. If you want to put in the chat, what do you think will be a good contingency for this? What could happen to the truck? Or what could happen to the delivery of tools? I want to hear you in the chat. Why would it be important to have a contingency? Use another budget. Maybe. Okay, so yes. So we have delivery of tools. What could potentially happen to the truck that we need additional funding? Yeah, feel free to write in the chat. Roads get washed out and damaged, so the truck, can't go. You already paid for the truck. Exactly, very good. It happens more than you think. Anybody else? the tools can't fit in the hired truck. You get a truck that's too small. Truck breaks down, delay in delivery. Exactly. Truck maintenance. See, there's I am a program officer, so the one thing I always see overspent in budgets is maintenance. You think this is not a large cost, you really always under budgeted, and you always, I've never had a project that you underspend on maintenance. That is, it is real. So yeah, so this is activity-based costing. The more specific, the better, because it gives you a clear understanding of how much it's going to cost and potentially what risks you have in doing so. So this is the fun part for us meal people that finance people might not agree with, and is how much should you budget for meal. And the industry standard is between 3% and 10% of our project's budget. And the bigger the project budget, the smaller the percentage. Sometimes you'll be lucky to get 3%, which is sad, but I think it is necessary to have 3 to 5 at least to have a very robust meal system within your projects. And I think sometimes what gets lost is the amount of work and resources that are required to do meal. But with a 3 to 5%, you should be able to cover most costs, including your meal officer, focal person, which Liliana will talk about later. But yeah, if you're not at 3%, worry. If you're getting 10%, you're very lucky. And the general rule, meal budget should be enough to ensure accuracy and credibility of the results, but should not divert the project resources that harm programming. So it's a balance, right? Everything is a balance. You want to make sure that you have enough to do your meal activities, but then don't go overboard. I mean, if you don't need to hire 100 data clerks, you can do it with 50 that are better qualified than the other 100, and do 50. If you don't need, NVivo or SPSS, you can do things on Excel. Go ahead and do that. Last year, we had a very good training in Thailand about using Excel. So, keep an eye out on how to, those trainings, because they're really helpful and they will really save you a lot of money. Having said that, though, be very clear on what you need and never skim. That's my bottom line, because you always be needing the resources sooner or later, or the project will be affected because you didn't do what you needed to do from the get-go. Finally, this is something that we worked at in Adra UK. It's our meal system. This is just how we want to do meal at Adra UK, and it's really, it connects with the way that we do it at the Adra network. We want to focus on systems, people, evaluation, evidence and learning, and accountability. And why, we have the why here in purpose, and then we have how. But since Liliana is going to come and talk about this, I want to focus on this to finish. People. Our budget for meal should be people-centric, because yes, you have all these capital expenses, you have all these other costs, but at the end of the day, are you giving your meal people enough resources to do their job properly? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the time to do their job properly? We need to make sure that meal is included in the budgets in project proposals. So finance people and meal people should be involved in project proposals from the beginning. Do you have a focal person? Do you have a qualified, well-trained focal person in your teams that's helping you develop these budgets from the beginning? Do you have TOR for this focal person and how involved are they in your whole system? And Liliana's going to talk more about this, but I just want to make sure that we think about everything I just mentioned, the itemization, having the buffer, all that is for the people that work Meal, that are on the ground every day doing the monitoring, doing the evaluations, making sure that we are accountable to everybody. This is for them. So sometimes finance people and program people don't talk, and then the Meal person is the one left out just by themselves. So more communication, more detail in your budgets, clearly defined needs, and focusing on people is what you need to do for meal budgeting. So thank you very much. I am gonna have Carrie, are we doing questions now or at the end?
We'll do it at the end, but if you do have any questions for Jose regarding the budgeting, just put them in the chat and we'll note them down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, Leah.
Thank you, Jose. So I'm going to share my screen as well. I hope you can see it. Zoom. Can you guys see? I hope it works well.
Can you put it in the presentation mode? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I hope it's coming, and I'm going to remove all of these funny things. So I'm going to talk about capacity building and staffing for a meal. The objectives of this session are how to assess projects' human capacity for meal, try to identify the capacity requirements and opportunities that we have available, define the roles and responsibilities of meal, and also to touch on the extent of outside expertise. So this is a screenshot from the meal manual that we are considerably referring to. In the meal manual, you can find a number of key internal staff roles to support the successful running of a meal system. So very often people, especially people outside of the technical bubble we are in, are scared when we speak about meal. It sounds like rocket science. It sounds like we need to hire the best people that have to have so many jobs and so many degrees and so much experience. But technically, meal is just another way of doing things that has very clear definitions. Some of them, for the roles and responsibilities, you can find in the manual. There is an example for a coordinator, an officer, an assistant, and project manager or a program director. We will go through them today, and maybe also just to highlight some minimum requirements. So it is important to include meal objectives in the job description of all staff at different levels. Very often we are asked if each project requires a meal person, a specific meal person. And there is no good answer to that question. Me as a meal coordinator, I would answer back asking, does every project require a finance officer? At the end, our data, our project implementation is only as good as we can prove that it is good. There are people who are able to implement, to run the finances, and to run meal with it. But at the same time, it is typically much better to be able to afford a person whose main job is to make sure that the data we are reporting on, that the information we are sharing is validated. So the recommendation is, of course, if possible, please budget in a meal person. If not possible, please make sure that there is capacity available in-house, that the program manager who is implementing has been at least partly trained to collect or verify meal information. Otherwise, it's very difficult to implement well. So if we cannot afford specific meal people, it's important to have trainings available and that we are responsible and have provided these trainings for the people to carry out their tasks. How do we plan for human resources? So these are basic guiding questions, but basically first we need to analyze, to make a gap analysis. Do we have any meal expertise in-house? And how does it match with the meal needs of the project or program? So for example, let's say that we have a meal person in-house who has been with us for a while, but is actually not involved in any of the projects or programs because their job is more based on advising the strategy people. So it would be probably very difficult for them to come back to projects and programs and start to create a meal system. Also, often we, for example, hire a meal person because they studied statistics or they studied some social science, and we expect them to be able to catch up running for the program. So this would be a gap. We need to first identify that what is in-house, what is available. If there is not, as sometimes is the case, we can find out if there is meal support from the organization supporting the project or program. Many supporting offices are able to extend some supports to the office that they are implementing with. So for example, let's say that we forgot to budget for a meal officer in a given project, and in-house it seems to not be possible because everybody is busy implementing. Then we can try and reach out to our supporting office and say, okay, can we rebudget, or can you send us someone, or is there any other way we can find the support for here? And here, is there a technical unit or individual assigned that can support and advise? So these steps are part of a meal competency framework. How do we implement it? As I mentioned, we do first an assessment. We assess our competencies of meal staff. For example, in Other Germany, we have 3 meal people with very different skill sets. So 2 of us are more statistics-based, project support. 1 of us does more qualitative stuff and has qualitative methods background. That's one part of the framework. Then we also look at the gaps between the current competencies and required competencies. For instance, we consider the languages. We know that in this project, we will be operating in a remote area that only local languages are spoken. When we do our gap analysis, we see that we have absolutely no one who speaks that given language. We know we need to hire someone, we put it into our budget, as Jose was mentioning. The other way around is capacity building. We can develop training and capacity building programs to address the identified gaps. Sometimes that's easy, we can do a capacity building, sometimes we need to look elsewhere outside. We also need to include a competency framework into performance management and career development processes. So this is the cooperation with HR. As MEO, we are often following our own paths and our own competencies, but once the integration with the performance management people, the human resources and the line managers improves, we can follow our own performance management and the continuous improvement. Of course, we need to regularly review and update this competency framework to make sure that we're on the right track. How do we do that? So first, we define the roles and responsibilities. We need to have well-defined roles and responsibilities at all levels of MEO. Questions that we need to address are: who will do data management, data analysis, and reporting? Who will have the overall management responsibility for the MEO system? And what MEO responsibilities lie with the volunteers and project? Very often, especially in onset emergencies, we rely heavily on volunteers, on data collection, on assessment, but also on implementation of our activities. And this is one area where we need to have very clear definitions of roles and responsibilities. So here are some suggestions for core competencies for all MEO staff. Every single person who does anything with MEO should be able to fulfill this framework. So they should be able to monitor and collect data. They need to understand what are different monitoring frameworks and what are different tools. You can build it into your interview, or you can find out during implementation if it's too late, if the person is already hired and you discover at some point that, okay, they cannot work well with SPSS or with COBOL or with Logalto, then we identify the gap and we can see how we build the capacity to get there. We can see data collection methods. Ideally, a MEO person knows both qualitative and quantitative data collection methods. It means that they are able to deliver a survey and to analyze its data, but as well lead focus group discussions. They can develop tools, so they can develop surveys, interviews, and focus group guides. And they can actually collect data, so experience in conducting field data collection activities. They are also able to analyze and manage. So if you're looking for someone and you need sentences for your job descriptions, proficiency in softwares such as the statistical softwares is important. Almost every MEO staff needs to be able to at least use basics of SPSS or Stata or R. They need to be able to clean and manage their data so they can validate data set. They should be able to use statistical analysis, at least the basics. They should be able to report and communicate. So it's very important for a MEO person. It's not enough to be able to analyze data, but also then to give the data further, because we collect a lot of information, but not all the information is always needed for reporting or useful for the report. So to be able to to write the report and to visualize it. I think visualization is becoming more and more important for meal staff, so that we can use tools like Tableau or Power BI, and of course the communication skills, so to be effective in verbal and written communication. There is also parts on accountability and learning that each one who works in meal should be able to deliver, and those would be knowledge of mechanisms for ensuring accountability to stakeholders, both ways, to the people we serve, but also to the people that donate to us. There are feedback systems, how to design and implement feedback systems, and learning and adaptation to capture lessons learned and incorporate them. These new sets of advanced competencies for me specialists and managers. So this would be your higher level. This would be what we in supporting offices often like to see in our offices, our implementing partners, and are often missing the person that stays beyond the project lifetime. They should be able to do all the things before, but also create evaluation frameworks, have a standard of methodological rigor, so to design evaluations that are methodologically sound and appropriate, and are good in sampling techniques. You can use different sampling methods and techniques for ensuring representative and reliable data. We cannot expect everyone to be able to do that, but at a certain level of the meal specialist, it would be important. At the same time, these are people who should already be able to technically lead, to give mentorship and coach junior meal staff, somebody who just came out from the university and needs their first experience, or to provide training, design and delivering training programs for staff on meal methodologies and tools. On technical leadership, it's also important to have skills in strategic planning and integrating meal into program design and implementation. So that beyond being able to break down the budget to small levels, to always think, okay, for this project, we have 30% need of a meal officer, for the next project, another 30%, and the third project can fill up the gap of the 40%. So a person who can look strategically, programmatically beyond projects and incorporate it. They should also be able to have a systematic approach and innovative solutions. So ability to identify and implement innovative solutions to meal challenges. More and more, we're facing more and more meal challenges in our field. Artificial intelligence and whole digitalization of the world and how we use the methods is becoming a key topic, I think, for our future years. And we need meal specialists to be able to identify those topics and find solutions for them, to integrate technology into meal processes such as mobile data collection and GIS mapping at the very least. Then finally, stakeholder engagement and communication. So the specialists and managers should be able to conduct stakeholder analysis and mapping, as well as to develop and implement strategies for engaging these people at various levels. Ideally, they would be also able to have advocacy and influencing decision makers using meal findings. So the data would be collected from the field level, and at the specialist and managers level, the analysis of the data, the presentation of it to key stakeholders would be taking place. The final third competency set in this competency framework would be the expert competencies for directors and senior leaders. So they would develop and communicate a clear vision and strategy for meal within the organization. These would be the decision makers who can set the pace and say, in 5 years, I would like my ADRA to have a meal unit that has 3 staff that work on this and that. They would be able to work on governance structures, experience in establishing and overseeing structures for meal, as well as policy development, developing policies and guidelines. In case we don't have any, these would be the people who are able to write them up and implement them at the same time. They would also be responsible for resource mobilization and management. So when a budget and resource allocation for meal activities is needed, they would ideally be included in this. They would be the ones who would be able to say that this 3% for meal will not be sufficient because of this, this, and this, and we need to fundraise for that and that more. They would also be the budget holders or the financial overseers, so they would need to have some financial management skills and oversight of meal budgets. They could influence well on high-level stakeholder engagement, so policy and decision-making, skills in building and maintaining strategic partnerships with donors, governments, and other stakeholders, and public speakers. Most importantly, though, at this level, we would expect that there would be strong ethical standards and compliance, so a strong understanding of the standards and practices in meal in ADRA, the compliance with ethical guidelines, donor requirements, and organizational policies would sit also here, and they would show a high level of cultural sensitivity. So These are the competency frameworks. When you think of it, the steps that we are suggesting is first to identify on what level is your organization, not your project, but your organization based on. Do we need more junior people and one specialist, or are we needing many junior people, 2 specialists, and 1 meal director to continue and close the gap? Where are our gaps? Do we have people who are language-wise strong, soft skills strong, that they have good tools and lots of statistical people, and it's sufficient working for us? We can produce reports of high quality or not? And where are exactly these gaps? And then we would have the analysis and take it forward to see what can we bridge, either through creating budgets or building the capacity. For both, you need, of course, finances. That is clear, but it's a very different financing. So what can we do for capacity building? We can create a capacity building plan for meal that ensures that all staff are equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge to carry out their role. First, we assess our current capacity. We conduct a survey or an assessment to understand where we are, and we identify the gaps. Then we define our objectives. What do we want? Do we want to have a skill enhancement to improve technical and soft skills? Or we want to knowledge update? We want to make sure that everybody is aware of the new meal methodologies, of the tools and best practices? Or we need to enhance actually the integration of our systems into project management processes. Once we know our objectives, it will be much easier to move on and to design the activities. So when we think of training programs, there are technical skill trainings on data collection, on evaluation, design, or report writing. The meal TLL is conducting the annual technical skills training, but you can find a lot of information online. When you need help with finding trainings, you can always reach out to us. We're very happy to advise. We often forget, but for meal, it's very vital to have also soft skills training, how we enhance our verbal and visual communication skills, and how we enhance our critical thinking. How do we solve problems, and how do we advance our analytical thinking, so that we get out of our geeky bubble and we are able to communicate our findings, our suggestions well to people who need fast answers because they need to implement now. We can also offer specialized training, advanced statistical methods, or data visualizations. And I would like to use this chance also to remind you, please don't forget to fill out the survey of what your office needs for training. It would help the meal TLL a lot in our planning, and Kerry will get back to it at the end. We can also do on-the-job training and mentorship, especially if we have at least 2 meal staff, 1 more senior, 1 more junior. A mentoring program is a very useful way of making sure that the meal capacity is better used. We can also do job rotation. So I come from an implementation side. I was a coordinator and an implementing person for a long time, and then I shifted towards meal. And I think this understanding of both sides of the analytical meal technical role and the implementation role is very important. So it's always, if you have the chance, make sure that your staff rotates to different roles. We can design capacity building activities, internal workshops, internal in your organization or internal in ADRA network, but also external seminars. Encourage participation in external seminars, conferences, and webinars on meal topic. Just send that email out and say that this is something that might be of interest. Please budget for this. As Jose was showing, external seminars are often expensive, especially when in person, but most owners do like seeing a big capacity building, capacity enhancement budget. So it is usually a very eligible cost. So we would encourage you to think of it. There are, of course, e-learning and online courses, lots of online platforms and webinars. There are peer learning and knowledge sharing. So we have the community of practice. And what we are doing in Germany, again, will be brown bag sessions, so informal lunch sessions where staff can share experiences and lessons learned to exchange together. It might not be easy in your office, but it is something that is nice it requires just a little bit of planning to choose a topic that we want to exchange on. It's informal, it's an easy way of sharing knowledge. We can also speak of toolkits and guides. We have the ENET, we are changing to ADRA source. We can develop and distribute more meal toolkits, guidelines, and best practice documents. And we have a resource library. So you can have it in your organization, but there is also a network-wide research library. What can be done more? We can schedule and make sure that the timeline is existing. So we create a schedule and a timeline, we allocate the budget, and we coordinate. So it's always good when the responsibilities are clear. Who would be the person who is responsible for capacity building? We monitor and evaluate and adjust and improve. On my next slide, there is a very simple example of capacity building schedule. So we do our gap analysis, our skills inventory assessment. Recommended would be to do it every year. It would take about 2 weeks, and it will be together with the HR. So here it's important to share that responsibility so that it's clear for everyone. We could do a technical skills learning every quarter for 3 days if we can afford external trainers. We can do soft skills training biannually with internal trainers. Maybe there is someone in your implementing parts, the programs parts, that is very strong in specific soft skills. So maybe we can reach out and hire them. We can do a mentoring program from the senior staff, internal workshops monthly, one person in MIL can organize them. Many external seminars, e-learning courses that would be self-placed, lunch sessions, feedback and evaluation, and regular assessment that are recommended to be semi-annual. So sometimes we need external support, right? We need consultancies. We cannot often do everything on our own, and very often it's actually easier to write the baseline out, to make a, sometimes it's obligatory to make a midterm evaluation or a final evaluation externally. So we find that engaging consultants is an effective way, but there might be some tips that we can consider together. So first, we need to identify very clearly what is that skill that we are looking into. If it's a terms of reference for an external evaluation, that is fairly easy. But if it's a specific statistical analysis, we need to identify it before. We need to define our project requirements and time constraints. Here, I would like to highlight, in our experience, you need a lot more time to get a good external support than we plan for. Very often we are, we finish the first phase, we start implementing, and then we think we don't need anything. But actually there is the baseline coming up and we do need to hire consultants. And this lead time we often waste in other jobs. And then the baseline consultant gets hired in last minute and the baseline information is very often lacking behind ideal. So here is very important to define the scope of work. Any kind of consultancy you're doing before you start your terms of reference, articulate your objective, what you want to achieve. This is the most important part. Very often terms of references are copy-paste or generators or so on. But once we don't have the clarity internally what we want, why are we paying this 30,000 for this consultancy other than that the donor told us to, we end up having data that we don't use well or we don't actually need. What helps is to sit down for a couple hours and write a scope of work. What do we want to achieve with this? Then we do the terms of reference. Once we have the scope of work, we can much easier create the terms of reference because we need to know then the job description, the qualification. We need to decide how do we advertise and how do we shortlist. The interviews should be conducted. This is very important. Very often we see that the terms of references are drafted, sent out, and 3 bits are received or 5 bits, but not many interviews are conducted. I would like to highlight very strongly that conducting interviews with the consultants can help very much in the decision making, because once we meet the consultancies, we will get a much better understanding of their assessment, of their technical skills, and of their personal skills as well, of what is possible and what is just written on the paper that they are sending in. Also, don't forget, please, to check references. We do a technical assessment of our interviews, but then we recommend very strongly to conduct references checks to verify that the consultancy is able to deliver. And then there is the part on contract negotiations. Some donors, not really the German donors, but other donors, are more flexible and allow negotiating terms for your contract with the consultants. What is important in the contract, please make sure that the deliverables are clear, that the intellectual property rights are clarified, that the timelines are set, and that there are confidentiality clauses. If you need help, your support office can always help in creating the contract, but don't underestimate that part. What is important, once we sign the contract and we selected our consultant, it would be good to make an inception session. You can call it project briefing, inception session, inception report. But this is a very key document, almost as key as the terms of reference or the scope of work, because here we already have a clear understanding of what the consultancy is actually going to do. in what way, what kind of tools are they going to use, and what is their time frame. Sometimes time frames change from the initial place, and this is in the inception report. So please don't underestimate checking it and checking it with the implementing part of your office. So the program manager, program director, whoever is implementing this given project, you do it together with the MIL. Then you need to clarify who is responsible for this given consultancy. Is it the MIL manager? Is it the MIL officer? Or is it the project manager? We need to have a communication plan and progress reports. So it would be very helpful to see how do we communicate together? How often do we check in? What happens if this is delayed? The quality assurance of a consultancy or a consultancy report is very important. In our experience, it goes two ways. Either it's only seen by the MIL people or it's only seen by the implementing people. Very rarely I see teams working well together where both parties see at the same time the report or the data that come in. And it will be very much recommendable to create a good team that reviews together and approves together. Okay, so we can provide constructive feedback to the consultant. Sometimes we don't provide any feedback, or we provide feedback that is not necessarily seen by the consultants as constructive, where we maybe say that the quality is not appropriate, but we don't specify what exactly, how not appropriate. And here we have to go back to the scope of work, to the terms of reference. We agreed that you will interview 12 focus group discussions, but there are only 10. Okay, be very specific when you're providing feedback so that the consultant can still approve, or you can negotiate what's the next steps. And then there are the final deliverables. You get the final report and you have to approve of it. Again, it has to be clarified who approves of it. It cannot happen that a MIL officer says that yes, this is approved to the consultant, whereas the programs person still is not happy with it. The data handover, this is very important. Confirm that all data tools and materials are handed over in an organized and accessible format. Why I'm highlighting is this, because sometimes we have a project that is very similar to other projects. So we can maybe reuse some of the data or some of the tools at the very least. And we also ideally have a knowledge transfer. So sometimes the consultancy is able to create a session after the report, or internally we can create a session to share findings and new methodologies or tools that were included. It will be also good and recommended to evaluate the consultant's performance for you internally, so you can know that this is a consultancy that we were satisfied with, and create a list or a data bank or a resource where we say this was a consultancy we used here and there, and we are happy with them. Or actually, this was a consultancy that we used and there were these shortcomings. Please advise me beforehand. You contract them again. Then also lessons learned. So please try to document any kind of lessons learned you have to improve future engagements. Consider what worked well and what could be improved. So for example, one way is in the procedural way of the consultancy contracting. We did the terms of reference, but we forgot this and that. But the other is the actual deliverables of the report. We found that this consultancy is really good in data visualization, or we found that they don't really have access to the field even though they promised. All of these kind of lessons learned, please map them somewhere out and give the feedback to the consultant. It's good to provide the formal feedback. It could also help them. Very often consultants do not receive further feedback after they submit it, and they do not understand maybe that there is space to improve. We always recommend to make an action plan after a report. So it would be very nice to make sort of a management response plan or an action plan to see what kind of recommendations the consultancy has. Sometimes an external consultancy can give you a very good view of your gaps and skills, but also in what kind of reporting is missing or what kind of data you don't have for a given facility. And also you can consider if there is anything that an internal team can build on from the consultant's work. So additional training or applying new tools. This could be an example for a timeline, okay? So I think one needs at least 1 week to identify the need for a consultant properly, to identify, develop the specifics and the TOR and the budget. You need another 2 weeks. So please, see, these are 3 weeks. It's a very generous timeline, I know, but when we want to do it well, we do need several rounds of feedback, because it shouldn't be done by one person. There is one person who is responsible for finalizing it and for oversight, but feedback from several individuals, such as program person and then somebody from the field level, like an assistant, would be very important. Then we need to advertise. You have very specific donor prescription here. Some donors prescribe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Some are happy with 1 week, but please always advertise as much as you can. Don't rely on the usual players in your country. The more we advertise, the more broader spectrum we get an understanding of the market. It changes quite quickly, and when we advertise globally, not only in our country, we might receive further bids. So the recruitment will take a while, and then we need another week for orientation and project briefing. This is a very important week where we fine-tune and specify what exactly do we want. Then there is the execution of the work, right? Sometimes, in our experience, we have to have the work within 20 days. And we advertise it that way, and we hope that they will deliver. But to be very fair to a consultant, if you have a big project and the work needs to be lasting months, anything under 1 month, I personally find it very difficult for a consultant to create well, because they need the data collection, they need to write up, present to you, create an action plan for you, ideally. So it varies, but the ideal scenario would be 3 months. You will have internal reviews, final deliverables, and an evaluation of the performance and lessons learned. It's a good thing for you internally, or you can do it with your supporting office to see how this consultancy went from our perspective. What was strong, what was very weak, and how do we integrate that? And I finished, so I will stop sharing. I see the chat was very alive, but I didn't get a chance to see those questions. So I think my presentation is at the end here, and we have a lot of questions already also beforehand, so probably we will be starting with those. And Kerry, I will hand over to you and you can facilitate for us how to go on.
Great, thank you so much, Liliana, and thank you so much, Jose. Yes, we do have a few questions that were asked in the chat and some that were asked during registration. So I'm going to hand the first one over to Jose. Clement asked, what is the rational percentage for contingency when we're budgeting?
Yeah, so there's no exact answer for this. But in general, most projects would have about 10% of a contingency budget of the general budget. So if we go by this logic, you can say that whatever percentage you have for meal, hopefully a large amount, you take 10% of that as your buffer. Would be, I think if we're using the logic that we use for the whole project, if we use 10% contingency for the whole project, then we use 10% for the meal budget, I think would be my suggestion. Again, this is, it would really be based on, yeah, the way that you work. I mean, I think it is really important to do a really good risk assessment so that you identify the risks and the challenges, and you have a good idea of what that might entail. But I can also see that it's a lot of work to go, so if you go with 10%, you probably will be covered for most of it.
Great, thank you so much, Jose. And then from Medino, do we have a standard consultant evaluation template? And I do know that we have a TOR in our ADRA meal manual. Liliana, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, for example, at Germany, we have an evaluation template for the consultants, because when we do the interviews, we have to follow that. We're happy also to share that if this is needed, but I imagine maybe implementing partners or some country offices would have that as well to see. It needs to be adjusted, I think, for your specific terms of reference, what you exactly are looking for, but there is a general guidance that is available. I'm not sure if anyone here has also in their office something, and it would be nice to share.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and if anyone here has any resources that you'd like to share with us, please do. You can send it to me and I can send it to the network. We can post it on HumHub, that kind of thing. There was a really interesting question that was asked during registration. How can finance and human resources teams better collaborate with meal teams to optimize results? And Jose had answered a little bit about that. Do you mind elaborating on that, Jose?
Yes, so I think the best way to collaborate with each other would be through the establishing of a meal system, a country-wide meal system. So most of you will be familiar with the meal plan, I hope. So the meal plan is for the project, right? So imagine the meal system, instead of being for a project, it's for your country office. So in the meal system, you would already have established meal costs for most projects, things that you would generally spend on meal. And you would have already TLRs and specific requirements that you have for meal people that you want to hire. So the meal system will help you. Unfortunately, we have a lot of staff turnover, but if you have a meal system, everything's already in one place where a new person comes in and they can already go and see, look, this is how we do the meal budgeting here. This is the trainings that are available to our meal people. These are the resources that you have at hand. So developing a meal system at a country level will help you have better collaboration. And saying that, in the development of the meal system, finance and HR people should be involved from the beginning. A lot of times what happens is, okay, Liliana, she's the meal person in Germany. Liliana, you go develop the meal system and then come back with what you have. And as wonderful as Liliana is, she's not as specifically knowledgeable in finance as, you know, or as HR, as a specific HR person will be. So having the different areas working together to develop the meal system will give you a better working atmosphere. And also very important, it's not a one-off thing. When you develop the meal system, you have to go periodically back to rework it. So generally the good practice would be every year you go back to the meal system. Okay, this is working, this isn't working, this is what we need to do. So you have to review it constantly. So that's definitely my suggestion. Have a meal system in place. I think the meal guidelines that we have, Harry, that the meal TLL has developed kind of encompasses what a meal system should look like. So I would invite you to go look at it and encourage your officers to develop the system, because that is one way where you can have constant communication between everybody.
Great, thank you so much. And Liliana, do you have anything to add to that? How meal? Okay. Sounds good. We have another interesting question in the chat right now from Christine. Is there any checklist for external consultant engagement? Is there a possibility for a hybrid mode when we hire external consultant? We struggle with budgets for external quality consultancy, especially when the UN agencies pay high rates as local NGOs. Baseline external consultancy's budget is very minimal. Liliana, do you want to take that one first? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So we have the terms of reference in the manual, if that helps. I'm also a bit not sure what you mean by hybrid modes of engagement of the consultants. So, but at the end, it comes down to budgeting. Of course, like the prices for evaluations, quality consultancies are quite high, especially depending on the country. If there is insecurity or if there is a remote location, the prices get even higher. And very often we are not able to match good consultancies, but this comes back to budgeting. So when we plan the project, it's very, very important to plan a rather high amount for evaluations. Very often we find projects for millions that plan for 3,000-4,000 evaluations. Nobody can do evaluation for that money. So there should be from the beginning a very strong consideration between the meal and the programmatic people, budget holders, on if we want good evaluation, we need to budget a lot. And it takes away money from activities, which is an argument for us to say, yes, but it will help you to make the activities better. So there is always this conversation. There is not much we can do about it. The prices are going to continue being extremely high. And our value is in making sure the terms of references we write are good, that the findings are incorporated, and that we budget correctly. Because then the program people will understand that it's important. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in these endless discussions about we budgeted for it and we didn't consult meal, but we thought this will be enough and nobody is doing anything with those findings. So my recommendation would be get involved as soon as you can. If it's not possible to budget correctly, you will need to discuss it with the supporting office or with the donor. But I find, in my experience, maybe I'm just very naive, that actually it's not difficult to get it into the official budget. It's just more of a problem that we are often shy as meal people to advise the horrendous amounts because we feel that it's too much and we take things away from the final users. But I think this needs to change the perspective. If you want Christine to specify more on what you mean by hybrid mode, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I see Jose is.
Yeah, I think she means where sometimes you would hire like an external person, but then still do some things internally. Like you will use your own, I think that's what she means. Like sometimes you use your own staff to do data collecting and data processing sometimes to reduce the cost. Is that what you mean, Christine?
Yes, Jose, like sometimes consultants for desk review would already price for a full budget for the final evaluation. So if we can cover some costs within our projects for data collection from our internal mail team, especially for EU projects, they always have high expectations for external final evaluation, but the budget portion that they give is can't afford for country office budgets. So
Yeah, I think a lot of the projects I go, we do the hybrid model where you use your own staff to do some of the work, and if that works, if the donor is okay with that you do the hybrid model, then go for it because it is a very good saving technique. Liliana said, nobody can do it for 3,000 or 4,000, but I think people can do it. It's just not very good. So
So-
I'd like to add something on that.
Nestor.
Morning. Yes. In order to assess the hybrid mode, it depends on the consult of the donor. There are some donors that external evaluation is external evaluation. Nobody from the project can participate. Just to help doing the logistics, even sometimes not even the logistics. So that is external. So that depends on the donor. But if the donor accept what we can, and if we have the capacity, some part of the quantitative data collection or some interviews can be done. Another way of thinking on hybrid mode is now with the problem with COVID security, we can hire a consultant that do the work remotely. So, and for example, just to give an example, we have now a problem with Sudan. We advertise, and no local consultant have applied because of the security. So what we decided is to do a hybrid evaluation, meaning that other staff will collect some data, the consultant remotely will prepare all the methodology, all the interviews and the questionnaires, and we apply those ones. And then the consultant do the analysis and develop the report. So those are the ways to work now. And I think after COVID, we have learned it's not the ideal, but we can do it. But again, depending of the donor. And again, on the quality, yeah, the problem is, and sorry to mention now, in our meta evaluation that we did last year, unfortunately, most of the evaluation reports that we evaluate with the meta-analysis are very weak. And we are in the process to develop a terms of reference template, including the recommendation of the meta-analysis, so that we're going to distribute a whole network that we can improve the quality of the evaluation. But the quality of the evaluation is going to improve depending of our budget. So otherwise, we will receive what we pay for.
Yeah, thank you, Nestor. I just wanted to add one more thing, Carrie, and it's a bit of a cheeky one, but a lot of country offices don't look towards inward, towards the church sometimes. My experience has been that there's a lot of very good, capable technical people that do evaluations that are Christian / Adventist, that if you reach out to them and say, look, this is how much I have, could you do this for me? And they will generally not, accept these charges, but they would, be willing to do it as a favor for a church organization. Not every country will have this, but some countries do have these people in their community. So I would encourage you to have a good look around your offices and the churches and people who are professionals that could offer the services, and you might get lucky. You might get somebody who's willing to do it for 5,000, 6,000 when they usually charge 15. So it really depends on the people, but it's up to you sometimes to be creative and resourceful. So yeah, but it's the reality that we all face, unfortunately.
Thank you, Jose and Liliana, and thank you so much, Nestor, for those answers. We have one more interesting question, and I don't know if either of you have answers to this. How do you address prioritizing the retention of existing staff, especially when developing a new project? I know we struggle with this in the network, so I wasn't sure if either of you have any advice or experience on that.
I think we all have experience on that, probably not the best, but for sure, I think this is something to consider in the beginning. We try to plan or ask as much as we can to plan for the job description to be written in a way in which business development is part of it. This is really important, that also technical people understand that they are supposed to support not only implementation, but also business development. So this is one thing, but also to allow for time for it. So it's not only that we expect our mill officers that they do everything and on top of it they write the proposals, but try to make sure that they have the free capacity for it. There is no magic, I think. Staff leaving ADRA very early on is very common. The retention rates are rather low, I think, especially in mill. But I think it depends also a lot about the work culture. Most of us work in ADRA for many years for specific reasons. There is no much I can share that would be very helpful other than trying to communicate from the beginning that it's not only about implementation, but business development as well. Trying to make sure that the people then have enough time, for example, after the submission to take their free time off to balance it out. Communicate with your supporting office if there is no in-house capacity, if the supporting office can maybe provide some search capacity there. That would be my tips. I don't have rather very good experience either. Unfortunately, I hope Jose has something better to offer. You muted yourself, so I see that we probably share the experience here.
No, yes, it's true. And I think, like, from my experience as well, it really comes down to each office culture. And in my presentation, I mentioned you have to budget not only for the projects themselves, but as a program. So if you have a very robust system where people are not there just for projects, and especially your technical mill people are not just there for projects, you make them part of the organization. They're there whether you have a project or not, because they're helping develop your proposals, they're helping develop your organization. That really helps people feel wanted and stay sometimes. So it's tough because you do have to have unrestricted funding to keep people like this or invest beyond what you're getting. But my impression is that it always pays off to have a mill person in your office for proposal development and for project design, because they will give you the input that you need to properly do it going forward. So yeah, again, it's not easy. There's no right or wrong, but if you do invest, it usually pays off.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jose and Liliana, for that. And thank you to the Meal TLL for hosting this, for supporting this and putting this on. We've come to the end of our webinar. So thank you so much for staying on, for listening and participating. We have recorded this presentation and we will send out the recording along with the presentations. I will collect those from Liliana and Jose after this. And we'll send those out with some of the answers to the questions that you've asked as well. We just want to quickly, before everyone goes, I have a couple of links I'm going to put into chat right now. So there is a link to the meal manual, the Azure meal manual. So if you haven't looked at that, please go ahead and look at it. There's a lot of resources on there. So please utilize those. If you did not receive the meal newsletter where we announced this webinar, you can subscribe. There's a link there to subscribe specifically to the meal newsletter. You can also subscribe to the TLL newsletter that's also sent out by Sharmila. And we have a survey, if you are a meal officer or a programmatic officer, we have a meal training survey. If you could take that before August 30th, we are looking for your input on what topics to do our training, our in-person training next year. And then if you have not joined our meal community of practice on HubHub, please go ahead and sign up for that. Thank you so much again to our presenters, to the Meal TLL, and thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all have a good rest of your day or evening wherever you are. Thank you.